An evil mother sells her fat daughter to a disabled stranger just to pay off her debts. She thinks she's getting rid of a burden, but what she doesn't know is that the man in the wheelchair is hiding a secret that could change everything. The girl, broken and terrified, expects cruelty, but instead she finds kindness, something she's never known before. Each day his quiet mansion begins to feel more like home, until one shocking discovery turns her fragile peace into heartbreak. Because this stranger isn't who she thinks he is. He's a billionaire, living in hiding, and her mother's deal was never what it seemed. Now trapped between betrayal, shame, and a love she never saw coming. Was she ever truly wanted? Or just bought? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of the small yellow house, its peeling paint visible even from inside where Tiana Coleman stood at the kitchen sink. Her hands moved methodically through the soapy water, scrubbing at stubborn food stains on the mismatched plates. The steady rhythm of washing dishes usually brought her peace, but today her mother's sharp voice cut through any chance of calm. "Another late notice!" Loretta Coleman's voice cracked like a whip from the living room. "How do they expect people to live these days? Everything costs double what it used to." Tiana's shoulders tensed as she heard papers being slammed onto the coffee table. She knew better than to respond. When bills arrived, her mother's mood always turned darker than storm clouds. "And you?" Loretta appeared in the kitchen doorway, waving an envelope like a weapon. "Standing there taking up space, eating us out of house and home. What good are you?" The words struck Tiana like physical blows, but she kept her eyes down, focusing on the plate in her hands. A chip in its rim caught the light, reminding her of how worn everything was in their house, including her spirit. "Look at you," her mother continued, voice dripping with disgust. 18 years old and nothing to show for it except more weight. No boy's ever going to look twice at you. No job's going to want you up front where customers can see you. Hot tears pricked at Tiana's eyes, but she blinked them back. The dishwater rippled as her hands trembled slightly. She thought of her grandmother's words. "Baby girl, you're fearfully and wonderfully made." But Grandma was gone now, and with her, most of the kindness in Tiana's world. When her mother finally stormed back to the living room, Tiana finished the dishes as quickly as she could. She slipped out the back door, letting the screen door close softly behind her. The backyard was her sanctuary, even if it was just a small patch of overgrown grass surrounded by a rickety fence. The evening air wrapped around her like a gentle hug as she settled onto the back steps. From beneath the stairs, several pairs of eyes gleamed in the growing dusk. "Hey there, friends," she whispered, reaching into her pocket for the cat food she always saved from her own meals. 3 stray cats emerged, a orange tabby she called Marmalade, a black cat with a crooked tail she named Shadow, and a grey kitten she'd dubbed Mouse. They approached cautiously but with familiar trust, and the sound of their purring brought the first real smile to Tiana's face all day. As she scattered the kibble, she began to hum softly. The melody of "Amazing Grace" rose naturally to her lips, just as it had whenever Grandma would rock her on the porch swing. The cats ate peacefully while Tiana's sweet, low voice carried the hymn into the twilight. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares," she sang quietly, "I have already come." The words felt especially true tonight. The peaceful moment shattered at the sound of knocking from the front of the house. Tiana's heart jumped. They rarely had visitors, and unexpected ones usually meant trouble. She heard her mother's quick footsteps across the living room floor, followed by the creak of the front door opening. Murmured voices drifted through the house. Curiosity drew Tiana back inside, where she moved silently to peek around the kitchen doorway. A man sat in a wheelchair just inside their living room, the kind of wheelchair that spoke of money, all sleek lines and polished metal. His clothes were expensive too, though he wore them with an air of discomfort, as if unused to being seen. But it was his face that caught Tiana's attention. Under a shock of dark hair, threaded with silver at the temples, his expression held a gentleness she rarely saw in adults. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and something unreadable flickered across his features before he turned back to her mother. "Louise," her mother was saying, her voice honey-sweet in a way that set off warning bells in Tiana's mind. "I'm sure we can work something out." The man, Louis, spoke so softly Tiana had to strain to hear. "The terms would need to be very clear, Mrs. Coleman." Tiana pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding as she listened to them discuss numbers, arrangements, schedules. The words themselves meant little until suddenly they snapped into focus with horrible clarity. Her mother was making some kind of deal, and Tiana was part of the bargain. She wanted to run, to hide in the backyard with her cats, to wake up and find this was all a bad dream. But her feet seemed rooted to the spot as Louise and her mother continued their quiet negotiation. When the front door finally closed behind him, Tiana fled to her tiny bedroom, closing the door as quietly as possible. The thin walls did nothing to block the sound of her mother in the living room. The familiar rustle of paper and distinctive snap of bills being counted filled the night air. Tiana lay in her narrow bed, staring at the water. Stains on her ceiling, her grandmother's hymn forgotten as fear of the unknown crept in around her like shadows. Every car that passed made her tense, wondering if it was Louise returning. Every creak of the house's old bones made her start. But gradually, the steady sound of her mother counting money became a terrible lullaby, and exhaustion pulled her toward uneasy dreams. Her last conscious thought was a prayer, not for deliverance, but for strength to face whatever tomorrow would bring. In the darkness of her room, the moon cast patterns through the thin curtains, painting silver shapes across Tiana's quilt, the only thing she had left of her grandmother. Outside, a cat yowled once, then fell silent. And in the living room, Loretta Coleman counted her money again and again, as if to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Morning came too quickly, the pale Georgia sunrise casting long shadows across Tiana's small bedroom. She hadn't slept much, her dreams filled with worried thoughts about what lay ahead. The sound of her mother's sharp voice cut through the quiet. "Get up. Don't make me tell you twice." Tiana's hands trembled as she packed her few belongings into a worn duffel bag that had once been blue but was now a faded grey. A couple of dresses, some underclothes, her sketchbook, and the small photo of her grandmother that she kept hidden under her mattress. The bag looked pitiful, barely half full. In the kitchen, Loretta stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. Her face twisted into a familiar sneer as she looked at Tiana's outfit, a simple flowered dress that did little to hide her size. "Couldn't you at least try to look presentable?" Loretta's words stung like always. "Though I suppose it doesn't matter. Just make yourself useful for once." A sleek black car waited outside, its engine humming quietly. The driver, an older man in a crisp uniform, stepped out and opened the back door with a small bow. Tiana clutched her duffel bag to her chest as she slid into the cool leather seat. She didn't dare look back at her mother. The drive seemed to take forever. They left the familiar streets of their small town behind, passing through areas Tiana had never seen. Eventually, they turned onto a private road lined with towering oak trees, their branches creating a natural tunnel overhead. The driveway curved gracefully through manicured grounds until the house came into view. Tiana couldn't help but gasp. The estate was enormous, a 3-story mansion of warm stone and gleaming windows. Flowering vines climbed the walls, and carefully tended gardens stretched in every direction. It was beautiful, like something from a fairy tale, but there was a stillness about it that felt almost sad. The driver carried her bag inside, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor of the entrance hall. Soft classical music drifted through the air from hidden speakers. The walls were lined with paintings, landscapes, portraits, and abstract pieces that made Tiana want to stop and study each one. Luis was waiting in what appeared to be a study, his wheelchair positioned near a large window overlooking the gardens. In the morning light, Tiana could see his features more clearly than the night before. He was handsome in a quiet way, with kind eyes that carried a shadow of old pain. "Welcome, Tiana," he said, his voice gentle but formal. "I hope the drive wasn't too long." "No, sir," she replied softly, looking at her feet. "Please, call me Luis." He wheeled himself closer, but maintained a respectful distance. "I'll show you around and explain what I need help with." The tour revealed a house that was as lonely as it was lovely. Despite its size and beauty, there were no family photos, no signs of children or visitors. Just art everywhere, paintings, sculptures, and half-finished canvases in what appeared to be a studio room. Luis explained her duties as they moved through the house. Basic household chores, dusting, vacuuming, helping in the kitchen, and if you're willing, some work in the gardens. Nothing too strenuous. He paused. "The staff quarters are in the East Wing. You'll have your own room and bathroom." Tiana nodded, trying to take it all in. The house was overwhelming, but Luis's calm presence made it feel less frightening than her mother's sharp words and unpredictable moods. Evening came quickly. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that could have seated 20, though only 2 places were set. Tiana sat quietly, watching as Luis struggled with his fork. His hands shook slightly. Whether from the effort or frustration, she couldn't tell. Without thinking, she stood and moved to his side. "May I help?" she asked softly. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. He nodded, and Tiana carefully adjusted his napkin, moving his water glass closer and angling his plate so it would be easier to reach. "Thank you," he said, and for the first time, his voice carried real warmth. "Most people either ignore the difficulty or try to do everything for me. You found the middle ground." Tiana felt her cheeks warm at the praise. No one had ever thanked her like that before, like she mattered. Later, alone in her new room, the enormity of the change finally hit her. The room was bigger than her old one, with a soft bed and delicate furniture, but it felt strange, foreign. A crack of thunder made her jump, and rain began to patter against the windows. In the growing storm, Tiana curled up on the bed and let her tears fall silently. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that this might be another kind of prison, or that it might actually be an escape. The thunder grew louder, and the windows rattled in their frames as the storm intensified. She thought about Luis's kind eyes and sincere thank you, about the beautiful art on the walls and the peaceful gardens, about her mother's dismissive words and the money she'd taken to send Tiana away. Each thought brought fresh tears until her pillow was damp beneath her cheek. The storm raged outside, but in the strange new room, Tiana eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with paintings that came alive and wheelchair tracks in garden paths that led nowhere. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass panels of the greenhouse, creating dancing patterns on the stone floor. Tiana stood in the doorway, taking in the sight before her. Rows of vibrant flowers stretched in every direction, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Delicate orchids hung from the ceiling in copper baskets, while roses climbed trellises along the walls. But what caught her eye were the paintings. Dozens of them lined the far wall, watercolors and oils capturing the beauty of the flowers in vivid detail. Some were finished, others were works in progress, but all showed a careful attention to detail that spoke of love and patience. Tiana picked up the cleaning supplies she'd brought and began dusting the shelves that held smaller potted plants. Her movements were careful, gentle. These weren't just plants, they were someone's treasures. As she worked, she found herself humming softly, an old habit that usually brought comfort. The sound of wheels on stone made her turn. Luis was entering the greenhouse, a tray balanced carefully on his lap. 2 tall glasses of lemonade sat on it, beads of condensation running down their sides. "I thought you might be thirsty," he said, maneuvering his wheelchair between the plant stands with practiced ease. "It gets warm in here, especially in the morning sun." "Thank you," Tiana said, accepting the glass. The lemonade was perfectly balanced between sweet and tart, with fresh mint leaves floating on top. She couldn't remember the last time someone had brought her a drink while she was working. "Please, take breaks whenever you need them," Luis added, his voice kind. "There's no rush. The plants aren't going anywhere." Tiana nodded, surprised. At home, her mother had never allowed breaks. There was always more work to be done, more criticism to be given. "Did you paint all of these?" she asked, gesturing to the wall of artwork. Luis smiled, and it transformed his face, erasing years of worry lines. "Yes, it's my hobby, though some might call it an obsession." He wheeled closer to one of the paintings, a delicate watercolor of morning glories climbing a garden wall. "Art helps me make sense of the world. When everything else feels chaotic, I can create something beautiful." Tiana found herself drawn to a half-finished canvas showing a sunset over a field of wildflowers. The colors were bold, joyful. "They're amazing," she said softly. "Do you like art?" Luis asked, watching her face. Tiana hesitated. Her mother had always dismissed her drawing as a waste of time. I like to draw sometimes," she admitted, "but I'm not very good." "Nonsense," Luis said firmly. "Art isn't about being good, it's about expressing what's in your heart." He wheeled over to a storage cabinet and pulled out a fresh canvas, some brushes, and paints. "Come, paint with me." "Oh, no, I couldn't," Tiana protested, but Luis was already setting up an easel next to his own. "Everyone can create," he said. "Sometimes we just need permission to try." Hesitantly, Tiana picked up a brush. Luis showed her how to mix colors, how to layer paint to create depth and texture. His instructions were patient, encouraging. When she accidentally squeezed too much blue paint onto her palette and it splattered on her shirt, she froze, expecting anger. Instead, Luis laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the greenhouse. "Perfect," he exclaimed. "Now you're officially an artist. The first rule of painting is that you always end up wearing some of it." Tiana found herself laughing too, the sound surprising her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this. They painted together for hours. Luis showed her how to capture the way light fell on flower petals, how to blend colors to create subtle shadows. When she made mistakes, he showed her how to incorporate them into the painting. "Mistakes make beauty real," he told her, pointing to a place where he'd accidentally smudged his own painting. "Look how that blur actually makes the flower look more alive, more natural." The sun was setting by the time they finished. Tiana's painting wasn't perfect, the perspective was a bit off, and the colors weren't quite right. But looking at it filled her with a quiet pride she'd never felt before. "You have a natural eye for composition," Luis said, studying her work. "The way you arrange the flowers shows real artistic instinct." Tiana felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. No one had ever praised her work before. As evening settled over the estate, Tiana helped clean the brushes and put away the supplies. The greenhouse was peaceful in the fading light, the flowers closing their petals for the night. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. Later, after dinner and a shower, Tiana was heading to her room when she noticed something on the floor by her door. It was a note, written in Luis's neat handwriting. "You are safe here. Luis." She picked up the paper with trembling fingers, reading the words again and again. 5 simple words, but they made her throat tight with emotion. Safe. When was the last time she'd felt truly safe? In her room, Tiana placed the note carefully on her bedside table. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving behind a clear sky filled with stars. She could see them through her window, twinkling like distant promises. She thought about the day, about laughter in the greenhouse, about paint-stained fingers and kind words, about permission to take breaks, to make mistakes, to create, about feeling seen and heard, maybe for the first time, in her life. The peace she'd felt in the greenhouse stayed with her as she prepared for bed. It wasn't just the absence of her mother's harsh words or the quiet of the big house. It was something deeper, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could breathe, where she could be herself. With Luis's note watching over her like a guardian, Tiana drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with colors and light, with laughter and the scent of flowers, with the possibility that tomorrow might bring more moments of joy. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the breakfast table in the sunroom. Tiana arranged fresh-cut flowers in a crystal vase while Luis buttered his toast. It had become their morning ritual over the past few days, sharing quiet breakfasts surrounded by climbing vines and potted plants. "The gardenias are blooming beautifully," Luis commented, glancing at the white flowers. "You have quite a gift with plants." Tiana smiled shyly. "My grandmother taught me about gardening. It was our special time together before she passed." After breakfast, they headed to the garden. Tiana knelt in the soft earth, carefully tending to the vegetable patch while Luis supervised from his wheelchair, offering guidance about which plants needed attention. "Did you always love gardening?" Tiana asked, wiping sweat from her brow. Luis's expression softened. "Marie, my fiancée, she was the gardener. I learned from watching her." He paused, his eyes distant. "The accident happened 3 years ago. We were driving home from a charity event. The other driver was drunk." Tiana's hands stilled in the dirt. She'd wondered about his wheelchair, but hadn't dared to ask. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Luis nodded, his smile sad but gentle. "I lost both her and my ability to walk that night. The doctors say I might walk again with extensive therapy, but—" He shrugged. "Sometimes it's easier to stay in the chair than to hope." Tiana understood about hope, how dangerous it could be. Slowly she began sharing pieces of her own past. "The kids at school used to call me names," she said quietly, focusing on pulling weeds. "Mother said I deserved it for being fat. Said if I wasn't so worthless." Her voice cracked. Luis reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder before withdrawing. "You're not worthless, Tiana. Not at all." In the afternoons, they painted together in the greenhouse. Luis taught her different techniques, how to capture light and shadow, how to mix colors to create depth. Under his patient guidance, Tiana's confidence grew. "Art helps me remember the good things," Luis explained one day, working on a landscape. "Even when everything feels dark, there's always beauty somewhere." Tiana thought about the drawings she used to hide under her bed, afraid her mother would tear them up. "I used to draw at night," she admitted. "When Mother was asleep, it helped me feel less alone." Louise nodded, understanding. Loneliness can be a heavy burden. As the days passed, their conversations grew deeper. Tiana spoke about the years of emotional neglect, the constant criticism that had worn her down. Louise shared stories about Marie, about their plans for the future that would never come true. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Louise wheeled into the library where Tiana was dusting shelves. "Would you read to me?" he asked, holding out a leather-bound book of poetry. "My eyes are tired from painting, but I'd love to hear these words again." Tiana settled into a comfortable armchair, while Louise positioned his wheelchair nearby. Opening the book, she began to read, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. The poem spoke of forgiveness, of finding light in darkness, of love that heals old wounds. As she read, something shifted in the air between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Louise closed his eyes, listening to her voice rise and fall with the rhythm of the verses. Tiana felt tears prick her eyes at certain lines that seemed to speak directly to her heart. When she finally closed the book, the room had grown dark except for a single lamp. They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in thought. Later that night, Tiana knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing me here, for giving me peace." Her grandmother had taught her about prayer, about faith that carries through dark times. For the first time in years, she felt that faith stirring again. In his own room, Louis sat by the window, watching stars appear in the twilight sky. His lips moved in a similar prayer of gratitude for the young woman who had brought life back into his home, for the chance to help someone heal, for the unexpected warmth that had begun to thaw his frozen heart. The moon rose over the estate, casting silver light through windows where two souls, once lost in different kinds of darkness, had begun to find their way toward light, together yet apart, each whispering thanks for the gift of understanding they had found in each other. The afternoon sun streamed through the library windows as Tiana organized books on the shelves. Her fingers traced the spines lovingly. Louise had told her she could read any of them. Such a simple kindness, but it meant the world to her. She was reaching for another dusty volume when Louise's voice drifted in from his study down the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and though she didn't mean to eavesdrop, his worried tone made her pause. "Yes, Mr. Holden, the transfer went through as planned." Louise's voice was low but clear. $25,000 as agreed. Tiana's hand froze on the bookshelf. Something about those words made her stomach clench. "Of course I know it's a lot of money." Louise continued. "But you saw how that woman treated her. What choice did I have?" The book Tiana was holding slipped from her fingers, landing with a soft thud on the carpet. Her heart began to pound. "No, Loretta Coleman won't be a problem anymore. The legal documents ensure she can't come near Tiana. I made sure of that." There was a pause. "Yes, I know buying someone's freedom isn't exactly conventional, but—" The world tilted sideways. Buying someone's freedom. The words echoed in Tiana's head like a cruel joke. Her legs felt weak as memories crashed over her. Her mother counting money that night, the dismissive way she'd been pushed into the car, Louise's careful kindness that now felt like nothing more than expensive pity. "Mr. Holden, I know what people might think," Louise was saying, "but when you have billions, what better use for it than saving someone who needs help?" Billions. The word hit her like a physical blow. Louise wasn't just wealthy, he was a billionaire, and she was just another charity case, another poor soul he could save with his money. The painting lessons, the gentle conversations, the shared meals. Had any of it been real? Tears blurred her vision as she backed away from the library door. Her chest felt too tight, making it hard to breathe. Without conscious thought, her feet carried her up the stairs to her room. No, not her room, just another thing he'd bought with his endless money. With trembling hands, she pulled her old duffel bag from under the bed. The same one she'd arrived with, still smelling faintly of home despite everything. She stuffed in a few clothes, moving on autopilot while her mind spun with betrayal. The sound of Luis's wheelchair approaching made her move faster. She grabbed the few dollars she had saved from her old wallet. At least these were truly hers. "Tiana," Luis's voice called from the hallway. "Are you all right? I thought I heard—" He appeared in the doorway just as she zipped the bag closed. His eyes widened at the sight. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. "How much?" Her voice came out raw. "How much did you pay for me?" Luis's face paled. "You heard? $25,000, right?" The words tasted bitter. "That's what my freedom was worth? Tiana, please let me explain." Luis wheeled closer, but she backed away. "Your mother, what she was doing to you, I had to find a legal way to get you out, to make sure she couldn't hurt you anymore. So you bought me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Like property? Like some kind of charity project for a bored billionaire?" "No." The pain in his voice almost made her waver. "Everything that's happened here, every conversation, every moment, it was real. I never meant to deceive you about who I was. I wanted you to feel safe first, to know me as a person, not a bank account." Thunder rumbled outside as storm clouds gathered, matching Tiana's turbulent emotions. "I trusted you," she whispered. I thought someone finally saw me as a person worth knowing. But I was just another problem you could throw money at." "That's not true." Luis reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Yes, I used my money to help you, but not because I pitied you. Because I saw your strength, your gentleness, your beautiful spirit trapped in that terrible situation. I couldn't bear to watch you suffer when I had the means to help." But all Tiana could hear was her mother's voice. "Make yourself useful for once." She'd been sold like furniture, her fate decided by others with money and power. Even if Luis's intentions were kind, the humiliation burned too deep. "I have to go," she choked out, slinging the bag over her shoulder. "Please," Luis begged, his composed facade cracking. "Where will you go? At least let me help." "I don't want your help." The words burst out louder than she intended. "I don't want your money or your pity or your charity. I want to be free. Really free." She ran past him, down the stairs, her vision blurred with tears. Behind her, she could hear the frantic sound of his wheelchair following. "Tiana, wait, please!" She yanked open the front door just as the first raindrops began to fall. The cool air hit her face, carrying the scent of coming storm. "Tiana!" Luis's voice broke as he called from the porch. "Please don't go. Please." But she was already running down the driveway, her feet splashing through puddles as the rain began to fall harder. Each step took her further from the warmth and safety she'd found in his home. But she couldn't stop. The pain of betrayal drove her forward into the gathering darkness, leaving behind the man who had saved her and broken her heart in equal measure. The last thing she heard was Luis calling her name once more, his voice nearly lost in the sound of falling rain. The rain had soaked through every layer of Tiana's clothes, making each step heavier than the last. She walked through the night, her shoes squelching with water, following the empty highway that stretched endlessly before her. The occasional passing car made her shrink into the shadows, heart pounding with fear that Luis might have sent someone to find her. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky in pale greys and pinks, her legs trembled with exhaustion. She hadn't eaten since lunch the day before, and her stomach cramped painfully. Through bleary eyes, she saw signs of a small town ahead, Gibson Falls, population 2,342. The streets were mostly empty at this early hour, save for a few delivery trucks and early risers heading to work. Tiana's teeth chattered as a cool morning breeze cut through her wet clothes. She found herself drawn to a modest white church with warm yellow lights glowing in its windows. Hesitating at the bottom of the church steps, Tiana hugged herself tightly. The sound of movement inside made her jump, but before she could retreat, the heavy wooden door creaked open. "Child, what in heaven's name are you doing out here in this state?" An elderly black woman stood in the doorway, her silver hair neatly arranged in a bun, wearing a practical navy dress. Her eyes, sharp with concern, took in Tiana's bedraggled appearance. I'm sorry," Tiana stammered, backing away. "I didn't mean to disturb." "Nonsense." The woman cut her off, already moving down the steps with surprising agility. "I'm Pastor Miriam Jackson, and you look like you've walked through Noah's flood itself. Come inside before you catch your death." Something in Pastor Miriam's voice, firm but gentle, like well-worn leather, made Tiana's defenses crumble. She found herself following the older woman into the church's warm interior. "The fellowship hall has a shower and some spare clothes we keep for emergencies," Pastor Miriam said, leading the way. "Get yourself cleaned up while I fix some breakfast. Then we can talk, or not talk, whatever you need." 45 minutes later, Tiana sat at a small table in the church kitchen, wearing donated jeans and a soft green sweater that smelled of fabric softener. Her wet clothes tumbled in a dryer nearby, creating a rhythmic background noise that somehow made the space feel safer. Pastor Miriam set a steaming plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her, along with a large mug of hot chocolate topped with mini marshmallows. "Eat up," she instructed, settling into the chair across from Tiana. "Food fixes more things than people realize." Tiana took small bites at first, but soon found herself devouring the simple meal. Pastor Miriam didn't press her to talk, just sat quietly drinking her coffee and working on a crossword puzzle. When Tiana finally pushed her empty plate away, Pastor Miriam looked up and said, "Child, pain makes saints or ghosts. You choose which you'll be." The words hit Tiana like a physical force, making her catch her breath. "What do you mean?" "Pain can hollow us out," Pastor Miriam explained, setting down her pencil. "Make us drift through life like shadows of ourselves, or it can forge us into something stronger, something that shines with compassion because we know what darkness feels like. The hurt doesn't choose, we do." Tears welled in Tiana's eyes. "I don't know how to be either one right now." "Then you start small, one day at a time." Pastor Miriam patted her hand. "Stay here as long as you need. We can always use help around the church." Days blended into weeks as Tiana fell into a routine at the church. She cleaned the pews each morning, dusting hymnals and straightening prayer cards. She helped prepare meals for the elderly ministry and organize donations for the food bank. But her favorite times were when she worked with the children who came for after-school programs. They were a lively bunch, curious, uninhibited, and full of questions. 7-year-old Marcus wanted to know if she could draw dinosaurs. 9-year-old Sophie asked her to teach them how to paint flowers, like the ones in her sketchbook. Little Amy, just 5, simply wanted to sit in Tiana's lap while she drew, watching with wide-eyed wonder as pictures emerged from simple pencil strokes. One afternoon, as the children gathered around her usual spot in the fellowship hall, Tiana found herself sketching their faces. She captured Marcus's gap-toothed grin, Sophie's determined expression as she concentrated on her own drawing, Amy's delicate profile as she napped on a nearby beanbag. Their laughter and chatter filled spaces in her heart she hadn't realized were empty. When they proudly showed her their own artwork, stick figures and rainbow houses and flowers with too many petals, She felt a warmth that had nothing to do with pity or obligation. At night, after the church grew quiet, Tiana often sat on the small balcony outside her temporary room. The stars seemed brighter here than in the city, scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet. Sometimes she caught herself wondering if Luis was looking at these same stars, if he ever thought about her, if he understood why she had to leave. She didn't know that miles away, in his sprawling estate, Luis sat in his wheelchair by the window, scrolling through his tablet. The screen showed dozens of news articles about local charities receiving anonymous donations, the food bank at Miriam's church, their children's art program, the elderly ministry, the building renovation fund. Each donation came with no strings attached, no recognition required. Luis paused on a small photo accompanying one article. In the background, barely visible, was a familiar figure helping children with art supplies. His finger hovered over the image of Tiana's smile, different now, more genuine than he'd ever seen it at his house. He closed the browser without zooming in, respecting the distance she had chosen to put between them. The tablet screen went dark, reflecting his face, and the same stars Tiana watched every night. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by the wealth that had failed to buy what mattered most, Luis whispered a prayer of thanks that she had found her way to somewhere she could truly heal. Back at the church, Tiana added another sketch to her growing collection, this one of Pastor Miriam surrounded by children, her face creased with joy. Below it, she wrote the words that had changed her course. "Pain makes saints or ghosts. You choose which you'll be." The choice was becoming clearer every day, drawn in the laughter of children, colored with the kindness of strangers, and illuminated by stars that seemed to whisper of possibilities she was finally ready to believe in. 3 months passed like pages turning in a well-loved book, each day writing a new chapter in Tiana's life at the church. The transformation wasn't just in her spirit. Her body began to reflect the healing happening within. Regular meals, peaceful sleep, and daily walks around the church grounds had worked quiet miracles. Her face, once shadowed by worry, now glowed with natural warmth. The dark circles under her eyes faded, replaced by a sparkle that matched her growing smile. Her clothes, the same ones she'd brought in her small duffel bag, hung looser now, but in a healthy way. Even her steps had changed, no more shrinking or trying to disappear. She walked with purpose, her head held higher with each passing week. "Lord have mercy, child," Mrs. Thompson, one of the elderly church members, remarked one Sunday morning. "You're blooming like my spring garden." Tiana blushed, still learning to accept compliments. "It's just the fresh air, I guess." "Fresh air and fresh hope," Pastor Miriam added, appearing beside them. "Speaking of which, Tiana, I've been watching how you are with the children. Have you ever thought about teaching?" The question caught Tiana off guard. "Teaching? Me?" "An art class," Miriam clarified, her eyes twinkling. "The children love your drawings. Maybe it's time to share that gift more formally." The idea took root quickly. Within a week, Miss Tiana's art hour was added to the church's activity schedule. She started small, just 6 children and some basic supplies donated by church members. But word spread faster than spilled paint. Soon, 20 children crowded around tables in the church basement every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. They ranged from tiny 4-year-olds barely able to hold pencils to 12-year-olds discovering their own artistic voices. Tiana taught them more than just how to draw. She showed them how to see beauty in unexpected places. "Look at this tree," she'd say, holding up a leaf with broken edges. "See how the cracks make patterns? Sometimes the most beautiful things aren't perfect at all." The children's artwork began decorating the church walls, bright, hopeful pictures that made people smile during Sunday services. But it was Tiana's own paintings, displayed in a quiet corner that drew the most attention. They were simple scenes: sunlight through stained glass, children playing, flowers pushing through concrete cracks, but they radiated something special. "There's such light in them," Pastor Miriam observed one day, studying a watercolor of doves taking flight. "You paint hope, Tiana." Miles away, in a different kind of sanctuary, Louis Kane was fighting his own battle with hope. His physical therapy sessions had intensified, driven by a determination he couldn't fully explain to his doctors. Hours of exercises, stretches, and painful attempts at standing filled his days. "You're pushing yourself hard," his therapist commented during one particularly challenging session. Luis gripped the parallel bars, sweat beading on his forehead as he forced his legs to hold his weight. The braces helped, but the strain was evident in every muscle. "Someone showed me that strength isn't about having an easy path," he said through gritted teeth. "It's about taking one more step when you think you can't." He managed to stand for 30 seconds that day, a personal record. Later, in his study, he added it to his growing collection of unsent letters to Tiana. "Dear Tiana," he wrote, his handwriting slightly shaky from exhaustion. "Today I stood for half a minute. The doctors said I might never walk again, but they didn't know about you. They didn't know how seeing your courage would change everything. I hope wherever you are, you're standing tall too." The letter joined dozens of others in a wooden box on his desk. Each one captured a moment he wished he could share with her. Small victories, quiet revelations, and endless gratitude for the brief time she'd been part of his life. One evening, as autumn painted the trees in gold and crimson, Pastor Miriam found an envelope in the church's mail. Inside was a check with 5 zeros before the decimal point, made out to Tiana's Hope Fund. The only note attached read, "For art supplies, dreams, and second chances." Miriam smiled, recognizing the careful penmanship from previous donations. When she showed Tiana the check, she watched the young woman's face carefully. Tiana touched the paper gently, her fingers tracing the letters of the fund's name. She didn't say Louisa's name, but her eyes filled with understanding. That night, kneeling by her bed, she whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you, Lord, for guardian angels who work in mysterious ways. And thank you for teaching me that sometimes the biggest gifts come wrapped in silence." The next morning, she walked into her art class with new supplies: professional-grade paints, brushes that felt like silk, paper that seemed to welcome color like an old friend. The children's eyes grew wide at the rainbow of possibilities before them. "Today," Tiana announced, her voice strong and sure, "we're going to paint something special. We're going to paint hope." And as 20 young artists bent over their papers, tongues stuck out in concentration, Tiana looked around the room filled with light and laughter and love. Her cheeks glowed with health and purpose, her steps were light with newfound confidence, and her heart, once so carefully guarded, beat steady and strong with gratitude. The transformation wasn't just physical anymore, it was soul deep, shining through every smile she gave, every lesson she taught, every painting she created. She had chosen, just as Pastor Miriam said, to let pain make her a saint rather than a ghost. And in that choice, she had found not just healing, but a way to help others heal too. Through it all, Louisa's anonymous gifts continued to arrive, each one a quiet bridge between two hearts learning different kinds of courage. Neither spoke the other's name aloud, but their shared silence held more truth than words ever could. The church basement hummed with excited voices as volunteers hung streamers and arranged tables for the upcoming Veterans Fundraiser Gala. September's golden light filtered through the high windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. Tiana stood on her tiptoes, helping to string fairy lights across the ceiling. Her hands were steady, but her heart fluttered with nerves. Pastor Miriam had asked her to be the keynote speaker, and the weight of that responsibility pressed heavy on her shoulders. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," Pastor Miriam said softly, noticing Tiana's distracted expression. Tiana climbed down from the stepladder, wiping her palms on her jeans. "I want to," she said. "These veterans, they know what it's like to feel broken and put back together. Maybe my story can help them see their scars differently." Late at night, after the church had grown quiet, Tiana sat at her small desk, surrounded by crumpled papers. The words came slowly at first, then faster as she allowed herself to be honest about her journey. She wrote about pain without bitterness, about growth without pride, and about forgiveness without shame. "The hardest person to forgive," she wrote in her neat handwriting, "is often yourself. But that's where healing starts." The days leading up to the gala passed in a blur of preparations. The church community rallied together, transforming the modest space into something magical. Crystal-clear glass vases held late summer flowers, their colors bright against white tablecloths. The children from Tiana's art class had created special paintings to honor the veterans, each one signed with careful pride. On the evening of the gala, Tiana stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. She wore a simple navy blue dress that Pastor Miriam had helped her choose, and her hair was styled in elegant twists. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. They shone with purpose and peace. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock sharp. Men and women in military dress uniforms mingled with community members in their Sunday best. The air filled with the gentle clink of glasses and warm laughter. And then, so quietly she almost missed it, a familiar figure appeared at the back of the room. Louis Kane sat tall in his wheelchair, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that made him look both distinguished and approachable. His eyes moved across the crowd, but he didn't draw attention to himself. Tiana's heart skipped a beat, but before she could process his presence, Pastor Miriam was guiding her toward the small stage they'd set up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pastor Miriam's voice carried clearly through the room. "Tonight we're honored to hear from someone very special. She's become not just a member of our church family, but a light of inspiration to everyone she meets. Please welcome Tiana Coleman." The applause felt distant as Tiana walked to the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded her speech, but when she looked up at the sea of faces, some bearing visible scars of war, others carrying invisible wounds, her voice found its strength. "When I was little," she began, "my grandmother used to say that God doesn't waste pain. At the time, I didn't understand. Pain felt like a punishment, like proof that I wasn't worthy of love." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "But now I know that pain can be a teacher if we're brave enough to learn its lessons." As she spoke, her words reached beyond the written pages, becoming a testament to resilience and hope. She talked about the darkness of feeling worthless, the courage it takes to accept help, and the transformative power of unconditional kindness. Sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms. She continued, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Sometimes it's a stranger who sees your worth when you can't. Sometimes it's a community that welcomes you without questions. And sometimes it's learning that your scars don't make you broken. They make you beautiful. The room had grown so quiet you could hear the fairy lights buzzing. Veterans who had seen the worst of humanity wiped tears from their eyes. Church members who had watched Tiana's transformation sat straighter in their chairs, proud to have been part of her journey. Today I stand before you not as someone who has all the answers, but as living proof that healing is possible. That forgiveness, especially of ourselves, is the key to freedom. and that every single person in this room, no matter their past or their struggles, is worthy of love. As she finished speaking, the silence held for a heartbeat before erupting into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, their faces shining with emotion and recognition. And then, through her tears, Tiana's eyes found Luis at the back of the room. He had removed his hat, holding it against his chest, and the look on his face held every word they'd never said to each other. Without thinking, without hesitating, Tiana stepped down from the stage and ran toward him. The crowd parted like a gentle wave, understanding they were witnessing something sacred. When she reached him, she fell to her knees beside his wheelchair, wrapping her arms around him as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. Luis's strong arms encircled her, and in that embrace was every letter he'd never sent, every prayer he'd whispered to the stars. "You came," she whispered against his shoulder. "I never really left." He answered softly. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and guests began to leave, Tiana and Luis sat together in the church garden. The fairy lights twinkled above them like earthbound stars, casting a gentle glow over their faces. They talked quietly, making up for lost time. Luis told her about his therapy, about learning to stand again. Tiana shared stories about her art classes, about finding her voice through helping others find theirs. "Your speech," Luis said, his voice tender. "It was beautiful." Tiana smiled, watching the way the lights reflected in his eyes. "I learned about beauty from someone who saw it in me when I couldn't." They sat together until the stars began to fade, their silence as comfortable as their words. The night air grew cool, but neither moved to leave, both understanding that some moments are too precious to rush. Above them, the fairy lights continued to twinkle, casting their gentle glow over two hearts finding their way back to each other, one quiet truth at a time. The morning after the gala dawned with a gentle mist hanging over the church grounds. Dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds, and the early sun painted everything in soft golden light. In the church's small garden, Tiana knelt among the flowers, arranging fresh-cut blooms for the children's art class later that day. Luis wheeled himself down the path toward her, two steaming cups of coffee balanced carefully on a tray attached to his chair. The squeaking of his wheels made Tiana look up, and her face broke into a warm smile. "I thought you might need this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Pastor Miriam showed me where they keep the good coffee hidden." Tiana accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "Thank you. Have you settled into the guest house okay?" "It's perfect," Luis replied, watching as she gathered more flowers. "Simple? Peaceful? Different from what I'm used to, but maybe that's exactly what I need right now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee as the morning birds sang around them. Then Luis reached into his chair's side pocket and pulled out a small package. "I brought something else too," he said, unwrapping several sets of new art supplies, pristine paintbrushes, vibrant watercolors, and fresh sketchbooks. "For your class. I remember how the children's faces lit up when they saw your paintings." Tiana's eyes widened at the supplies. "Luis, these are beautiful, but you don't have to—" "I want to," he interrupted gently. "Let me help, Tiana. Not because I pity you or want to buy your friendship, but because I believe in what you're doing here." Their eyes met, and Tiana saw the sincerity in his gaze. Slowly she nodded, accepting both the gift and the truth behind it. As the morning progressed, they fell into an easy routine. Luis helped organize the art supplies while Tiana set up the classroom. They worked together seamlessly, as if the months apart had never happened. When everything was ready, they joined hands and bowed their heads in prayer, a habit Tiana had developed with her students that Louise now embraced naturally. "Dear Lord," Tiana whispered, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for this day, for these children, and for second chances. Help us share your love through every brush stroke and every smile." "Amen," Louise added quietly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze before letting go. Later, as they watched the children file in for class, Louise noticed how Tiana's entire being seemed to light up. She moved among them with grace and patience, helping one little boy hold his brush correctly, praising a little girl's choice of colors. The room filled with laughter and chatter, and Louise found himself smiling more than he had in years. During a quiet moment, while the children were absorbed in their painting, Tiana pulled up a chair beside Louise's wheelchair. "Sometimes I'm scared," she admitted in a low voice, watching the children work. "Not of being here or of teaching, but of feeling too much, of trusting that this happiness won't disappear like morning dew." Louise turned to look at her, understanding written across his features. "I know that fear," he said. "After the accident, I stopped letting myself hope for anything. Hope felt dangerous, like setting myself up for another fall." "What changed?" Tiana asked, meeting his gaze. "You did," he answered simply. "Watching you find your strength, seeing you build something beautiful out of pain, it made me want to try again, to believe again." Their conversation was interrupted by excited squeals as one of the children discovered how to mix colors to make purple. Tiana laughed, the sound pure and unguarded, and Louise felt his heart expand with warmth. The peaceful rhythm of their days continued like this. Mornings filled with prayer and preparation, afternoons with art and laughter, evenings spent in quiet conversation. Their relationship grew like a delicate flower, each day adding another petal of trust, another leaf of understanding. But peace, as it often does, proved fragile. It was during the Wednesday afternoon service when the church doors swung open, and Loretta Coleman swept in like a storm cloud in a floral dress. Her entrance was perfectly timed, right in the middle of the worship service, when the congregation was fully assembled. Tiana, who had been helping a young girl with her hymnal, froze at the sight of her mother. Louise, sitting nearby in his wheelchair, immediately tensed, his hands gripping his armrests. "My baby!" Loretta cried out, her voice carrying dramatically across the sanctuary. "Oh, my precious daughter!" She rushed down the aisle, tears streaming down her face, arms outstretched. Before anyone could react, she had enveloped Tiana in an elaborate embrace, sobbing into her shoulder. "I've been so lost without you," Loretta wailed, making sure every word carried to the furthest pew. "I've changed, baby. I've seen the error of my ways. Can you ever forgive your foolish mama?" The congregation watched with mixed expressions of sympathy and uncertainty. Pastor Miriam stepped forward, her face carefully neutral, while Louise observed the scene with growing concern. He recognized the calculated nature of Loretta's performance, the timing, the tears, the theatrical delivery. It was all too perfect, too practiced. Tiana, however, stood rigid in her mother's embrace, tears welling in her eyes. Louise could see the conflict on her face, the ingrained desire to believe, to forgive, warring with the hard-learned lessons of the past. "Mama?" Tiana whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "I've been searching for you," Loretta declared, pulling back to cup Tiana's face in her hands. "When I heard you were here, speaking at that fancy event, I knew God was giving me a sign, a chance to make things right." Pastor Miriam stepped closer, her presence steady and grounding. "Mrs. Coleman, perhaps we should continue this reunion in my office, away from—" "Oh, but I've found Jesus!" Loretta interrupted, turning to address the congregation. I've seen how wrong I was, how cruel. I need my church family to witness my repentance, my desire to change." Luis watched as several church members nodded approvingly, moved by what appeared to be a prodigal mother's return. But he noticed the slight tremor in Loretta's hands, the calculated way her eyes darted around the room, assessing her audience's reaction. "Of course," Tiana said softly, her natural compassion winning out over caution. "Of course you can stay, Mama. The church has guest dormitories." "Oh, thank you, baby." Loretta pulled Tiana into another embrace, but over her daughter's shoulder, her eyes met Luis's. For a brief moment, her mask slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the tears. Luis held her gaze steadily, letting her know he wasn't fooled. But he remained silent, understanding that this was Tiana's journey, her choice to make. All he could do was stay close, ready to catch her if, or when, the facade crumbled. As the congregation slowly dispersed, murmuring prayers and words of encouragement, Luis watched Loretta being led to the dormitories by Pastor Miriam. Tiana stood rooted to the spot, her hands clasped tightly together. "Are you okay?" Luis asked quietly, wheeling closer to her. Tiana turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "I want to believe her, Luis. I want to so badly." He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know you do. That's what makes you beautiful. Your capacity for forgiveness. Just be careful with your heart." She nodded, squeezing his hand back, and they stayed like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other's presence as the afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows at their feet. Days melted into one another at the church, but the peaceful rhythm Tiana had found began to shift. Like poison dripping slowly into clear water, Loretta's presence changed everything. It started with small comments during breakfast in the church kitchen. My, Loretta would say, stirring her coffee with precise movements. "Another article about Mr. Kane's generous donations in the paper. He sure knows how to keep his name in the headlines, doesn't he?" Tiana would try to focus on preparing art supplies for her morning class, but her mother's words would linger, planting tiny seeds of doubt. "Mama, Luis isn't like that," she'd reply, but her voice would waver slightly. Loretta would just smile, that knowing smile that made Tiana feel small again. "Baby, I've been around longer than you. Rich men like that, they always have an angle. Always." One morning, while Tiana was setting up her classroom, Loretta drifted in, holding a newspaper. "Look here, sugar," she said, pointing to a headline that read, "Reclusive billionaire Kane makes waves with church donations." Funny timing, isn't it? Right when you're getting noticed for your work with the children. Tiana's hands trembled as she arranged paintbrushes. "He's just being kind, Mama." "Kind?" Loretta laughed softly. "Oh, baby, you're just his project. His way of showing the world what a good man he is. Saving the poor, fat black girl. That's publicity gold." "Stop it," Tiana whispered, but the words had found their mark. Over the next few days, Tiana began to see shadows where there had been light. Every time Luis smiled at her, she wondered if it was genuine. When he praised her art classes, she questioned his motives. The newspaper headlines seemed to mock her, each one a reminder of the vast gulf between their worlds. She started making excuses to miss their afternoon art sessions. "I need to prepare for tomorrow's class," she'd say, or "I'm not feeling well today." Each time, Luis's face would fall slightly, but he'd nod understanding. His calls went unanswered. Text messages received brief replies. The distance between them grew like frost spreading across a window. "You're getting stronger," Loretta would say approvingly. "Standing on your own 2 feet. That's my girl." But at night, Tiana would lie awake, her heart aching. She'd remember the greenhouse, the laughter, the way Luis looked at her like she mattered. Was it all just for show? One particularly difficult evening, after dodging another of Luis's attempts to talk, Tiana sat in her classroom long after the children had gone. The setting sun painted the walls orange, reminding her of evenings spent painting with Luis. Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she pulled out a piece of paper. The words came slowly, painfully. "Dear Luis, maybe I need to stand on my own now." She left it on her desk, knowing he would find it when he came looking for her tomorrow. As she walked out, thunder rumbled in the distance, just like that night she'd first run away from his house. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Meanwhile, Luis had wheeled himself into the empty classroom, hope still clinging to his heart that he might find her there. The note lay on her desk like a fallen leaf. As he read it, his shoulders slumped, the weight of loss settling over him like a heavy blanket. He sat there for a long while, the note crumpled in his hand, as thunder grew louder outside. The room that had once been filled with children's laughter and Tiana's gentle voice now felt as empty as his house had been before she came into his life. The drive home was silent, except for the growing storm. His driver knew better than to speak, having witnessed the joy Tiana had brought to his employer's life, and now seeing it slip away again. Thunder crashed outside his bedroom window that night, an echo of that first loss. Luis sat in his wheelchair, staring out at the rain-streaked darkness, remembering another stormy night when she'd left. The parallel was cruel. Twice now he'd lost her to doubt and fear. The rain beat against the windows, matching the rhythm of his heart. In the distance, lightning illuminated the greenhouse where they'd shared so many peaceful hours. Now it stood dark and empty, like the space Tiana had left in his life. He reached for his phone one last time, thumb hovering over her number, but he remembered her note. "Maybe I need to stand on my own now," and set it down. If this was what she needed, he would respect it, even if it broke his heart all over again. The storm raged on, its fury matching the turmoil in his soul. In his mind, he could still hear her laugh, see her face light up when she mastered a new painting technique, feel the warmth of her presence that had brought his cold house to life. But now, like before, he was alone with the thunder. The small apartment on Cherry Street wasn't much, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom so tiny you could barely turn around in it. But it was Tiana's, her first real place of her own. She'd found it 3 days after leaving the church, scraping together first month's rent from her savings. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, had taken one look at her tear-stained face and reduced the security deposit, saying simply, "Everyone needs a fresh start sometimes." The walls were bare except for a few of her sketches, mostly of the children from her art classes. She couldn't bring herself to paint anything new. Her art supplies sat untouched in a corner, gathering dust. The morning shift at Rosie's diner started at 5:30 in the morning. Tiana learned quickly how to balance plates, memorize orders, and keep smiling even when her feet felt like they were on fire. The other waitresses were kind, showing her tricks to make the work easier. But the constant motion and noise left little room for thought, which was exactly what she wanted. "Order up!" Sam, the cook, would call out, and Tiana would move, grateful for the distraction. But in the quiet moments, wiping down tables, refilling salt shakers, walking home in the evening, thoughts of Luis would creep in. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. How gentle his hands were with a paintbrush. The sound of his laugh when she'd tell stories about the children's art adventures. Every night she'd kneel by her bed to pray, just as her grandmother had taught her. The words felt hollow now, echoing in the empty room. "Dear Lord." She'd begin, then fall silent, unsure what to ask for anymore. The television stayed off. She couldn't bear to see any news about Louise Kane's charitable works. Each headline felt like an accusation now, her mother's words poisoning even the memory of his kindness. One Tuesday morning, while Tiana was clearing tables, the bell above the diner door chimed. She looked up to see Pastor Miriam's familiar figure, dignified even in the fluorescent lighting. "Child," Miriam said softly, "we need to talk." They sat in a corner booth, away from other customers. Tiana's hands fidgeted with a paper napkin, shredding it into tiny pieces. "Your mother's been busy," Miriam began, her voice carrying a weight Tiana had never heard before. "Did you know she's been taking money from the donation fund, the one meant for your art program?" Tiana's heart stopped. "What?" "Louise's donations. She's been intercepting them, convincing the church treasurer she had authorization to collect them on your behalf." Miriam's eyes were sad but firm. "She's taken over $15,000 so far." The napkin in Tiana's hands fell to pieces. "No," she whispered. "She wouldn't." But even as she said it, she knew it was true. The new clothes her mother had been wearing, the fancy phone, the talk of moving to a better apartment. "I trusted her." Tiana's voice cracked. "Sometimes," Miriam said gently, "the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most deeply." Tiana's shift ended early that day. She walked to the church, each step heavy with purpose. She found her mother in the community room, chatting with some of the newer members, playing the role of the reformed parent perfectly. "Mama," Tiana said quietly, "we need to talk." They went to the garden, where Tiana had spent so many hours teaching children to draw flowers. The roses were blooming, their scent sweet in the afternoon air. "How could you?" Tiana's voice trembled. "That money was for the children's program." Loretta's face shifted, like a mask slipping. "Baby, you don't understand." "Don't." Tiana held up her hand. "Don't lie to me anymore. Please." Something in Loretta seemed to crack then. She sat heavily on a bench, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. "I just wanted—" she began, then stopped. Tears streaked her makeup. "I was tired of being nothing, of having nothing, when I saw how easy it was to get the money." Her voice broke, caught between genuine remorse and frustrated greed. "So you used me," Tiana said softly. "Again." "No." Loretta reached for her daughter's hand. "I was protecting you from him, from being used." "Luis never used me." The truth of it hit Tiana like a wave. He never asked for anything. He just gave. And you couldn't stand that, could you? Because it showed you what real kindness looks like. Loretta's face crumpled, decades of bitterness and fear spilling out in ugly sobs. "I didn't mean to. Everyone always leaves me with nothing." Tiana stood there, watching her mother break down, feeling something shift inside her own heart. The anger was still there, but beneath it was a deep, aching sadness, not just for herself, but for this broken woman who had never learned how to love without hurting. Later that night, in her tiny apartment, Tiana finally let herself cry. Really cry, the kind of crying that comes from the depths of your soul. She cried for the lost months, for the trust she'd thrown away, for Luis's kindness she'd doubted. She cried until her pillow was soaked and her throat was raw. Around midnight, there was a knock at her door. Pastor Miriam stood there, holding 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might need this," she said simply, stepping inside. They sat on Tiana's small couch, the steam from their cups rising like prayers in the dim light. "I was so stupid," Tiana whispered. "No," Miriam corrected gently. "You were hurt. There's a difference. I believed every word she said about him. After everything he'd done, sometimes, Miriam said. It's easier to believe the worst than to trust in goodness, especially when you've been taught not to trust it. She set her cup down. But now you have a choice to make. What do you mean? You can let this break you, or you can let it teach you. You can hide from the truth, or you can face it and seek forgiveness. Tiana stared into her tea, seeing her reflection ripple in the amber liquid. What if it's too late? Child. Miriam smiled softly. It's never too late for grace. Meanwhile, across town in his sprawling estate, Luis was pushing himself too hard. He'd been working for hours in his studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases. His latest painting, a large piece he'd titled "Grace Found Me," stood on an easel, demanding his attention even as his vision blurred with exhaustion. The painting showed a garden in morning light, with a figure standing among blooming flowers. Though the face wasn't clear, anyone who knew Tiana would recognize her in the gentle curve of the shoulder, the way the hands reached toward the light. Luis had been working non-stop for days, barely eating, hardly sleeping. His physical therapist had warned him about overexertion, but he couldn't stop. The painting felt like his last connection to Tiana. If he could just finish it, maybe. The room began to spin. His hands trembled on the wheels of his chair. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was the painting, its colors blurring like tears. He slumped forward in his wheelchair, the paintbrush falling from his limp fingers, leaving a streak of grace-filled color across the studio floor. Dawn broke with a heavy gray sky, the kind that promised storms. Tiana stood at her apartment window, watching the first hints of light struggle through the clouds. She hadn't slept all night, Miriam's words echoing in her mind. It's never too late for grace. Her fingers traced the cross necklace at her throat, a gift from the church children. One of them, little Sarah, had said it was, "To remember Jesus loves you even when you're sad." The simple wisdom of children often cuts straight to the truth. Tiana reached for her phone, her hands trembling slightly as she dialed Miriam's number. The pastor answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for the call. "Pastor Miriam?" Tiana's voice wavered. Could you watch over Mama today? I need to make things right." "Of course, child." Miriam's voice was warm and steady. "Go where your heart leads you." Tiana packed quickly, just her sketchbook and a small umbrella. The morning air was thick with humidity as she hurried to the bus stop, her heart pounding with each step. The first drops of rain began to fall as she climbed aboard the early morning bus. During the 45-minute ride, the weather grew increasingly dramatic. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled across the sky like God's own drums. Tiana pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Each mile brought memories flooding back. Luis teaching her to mix colors, his gentle laugh when she got paint on her nose, the way he looked at her art like it was precious. "Lord," she whispered, "please let me fix this." The bus dropped her at the corner of Luis's estate. The iron gates stood open, unusual for this time of morning. Something felt wrong. The perfectly maintained grounds looked neglected, with leaves scattered across the paths and wilted flowers in the garden beds. Tiana ran through the rain, her clothes growing heavy with water. As she approached the main house, her stomach clenched. The front door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out into the grey morning. "Luis," she called, pushing the door open wider. The foyer was dark, but she could see light coming from the direction of his studio. "Luis, are you here?" No answer. Her wet shoes squeaked against the hardwood floors as she moved through the house. The air felt too still, too quiet despite the storm raging outside. When she reached the studio doorway, her heart stopped. Luis lay slumped over in his wheelchair beside an easel, paintbrush fallen from his limp fingers. A streak of blue paint traced a line across the floor like a tear. "No, no, no!" Tiana rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. His skin was cool to the touch, but she could feel a pulse. Weak, but steady. "Luis, please." She looked up at the canvas he'd been working on, and her breath caught. It was her, or rather a figure that could only be her, standing in a garden touched by morning light. The painting wasn't finished, but it radiated such love that tears sprang to her eyes. "Help!" she called out, but the house staff wouldn't arrive for hours yet. Rain lashed against the windows as thunder cracked overhead. Tiana grabbed Luis's hand between both of hers, bowing her head. "Please, Lord," she prayed, her voice breaking. "Please don't take him. I was so blind. I let fear and doubt poison everything good and pure. Please give me a chance to make it right." Her tears fell onto their clasped hands, warm drops mixing with the paint still staining his fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." A slight movement made her look up. Luis's fingers twitched in her grasp, and his eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. Those kind eyes she'd missed so much, now clouded with exhaustion but still full of warmth. "You came back," he whispered, his voice rough and weak. Tiana could barely speak through her tears. "I should never have left." Luis's free hand shakily reached up to touch her cheek. "You were never bought," he said softly. "You were found." A sob escaped her throat as she pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear. Outside, the storm raged on, but in here, in this moment, grace had found them both again. "I need to call an ambulance," she said, starting to pull back, but his hand weakly caught her arm. "Just stay a moment." He murmured, "I've missed you." So she stayed, holding him as the storm slowly began to ease, the first rays of sun breaking through the clouds and catching the wet paint on his unfinished canvas. The light made the colors glow like stained glass in a church window, blues and golds and soft rose pinks, all blending together in a testament to redemption. Luis's breathing steadied, growing stronger with each passing minute. When he spoke again, his voice was clearer. "I couldn't stop painting you," he admitted. "Even when you were gone, you were still here." He gestured weakly at the canvases lining the walls, dozens of paintings, all capturing different moments of their time together. Tiana's heart ached as she looked at them. There she was, reading to children at the church, tending the garden, laughing in the sunroom. Each painting was filled with such tenderness it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I thought," she started, then had to take a breath. "I thought maybe it was all just charity, that I was just another project, like Mama said." "Never," Luis said firmly, despite his weakness. "You were the one who made me want to live again, to try walking again, to believe in miracles again." Thunder rumbled in the distance, softer now, like God's gentle reminder of his presence. Tiana helped Luis sit up straighter in his chair, noting with concern how thin he'd become. "We need to get you checked out," she insisted. "You're exhausted." He nodded, too tired to argue. As she reached for her phone to call for help, he caught her hand once more. "Promise me something?" he asked. "Anything. Promise you'll stay this time. Not because you have to, but because you want to." Tiana squeezed his hand, feeling the dried paint crack between their palms. "I promise. We'll figure this out together." A shaft of sunlight broke through the studio windows, catching the droplets of rain still clinging to the glass. They sparkled like diamonds, casting tiny rainbows across the room. Nature's own celebration of grace restored. The days following Luis's collapse were filled with quiet healing. The doctors had insisted on overnight observation at the hospital, diagnosing severe exhaustion and dehydration. When he returned home, Tiana transformed his sunroom into a peaceful sanctuary, bringing in comfortable cushions and fresh flowers from the garden. "You need proper rest," she told him firmly on his first morning back, arranging his medications and a glass of water on the side table. "Doctor's orders." Luis smiled weakly from his wheelchair. "Only if you promise to stay and read to me again." So began their new routine. Each morning, Tiana would help Luis with his exercises, supporting him as he worked with his physical therapist. The determination in his eyes reminded her of the strength she'd first seen in him. Not just physical strength, but the quiet power of a spirit refusing to give up. In the afternoons, she'd sit beside him in the sunroom, reading from his worn Bible. Her voice filled the space with ancient words of comfort as sunlight streamed through the windows, painting patterns across the floor. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read one afternoon, her voice soft but clear. "I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." Luis closed his eyes, letting the familiar verses wash over him. "My grandmother used to read that to me," he said when she finished. "After the accident, I couldn't bear to hear it anymore. But now—" "Now?" Tiana prompted gently. "Now it feels like coming home." They spent their evenings talking about everything and nothing. Their fears, their dreams, the way faith felt like a quiet river running beneath their lives. Luis shared stories about his late fiancé, without the heavy weight of guilt that had once accompanied her memory. "She would have liked you," he told Tiana one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "She always said God's greatest gift was his ability to make beauty from brokenness." Tiana reached over and squeezed his hand. "Like us. Exactly like us." A week into his recovery, they were sharing a quiet breakfast when they heard a car pull up outside. Through the window, they saw Loretta stepping out, her usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. Luis felt Tiana tense beside him. "We don't have to see her," he said softly. But Tiana shook her head. "No, it's time." When Loretta entered, she looked smaller somehow, her makeup-free face showing lines of worry and regret. She stood in the doorway, twisting her hands together. "Baby?" she started, then stopped, tears filling her eyes. "I'm so sorry. For everything." Tiana remained silent, watching her mother carefully. Years of manipulation had taught her caution, but something felt different this time. The proud set of Loretta's shoulders was gone, replaced by a genuine humility she'd never seen before. "I've been talking with Pastor Miriam," Loretta continued, her voice shaking. "She's helped me see what I've done to you. How I let my own bitterness poison everything it touched." Luis wheeled forward slightly, his presence calm and steady. "Why don't you sit down, Loretta?" suggested kindly. She sank into a chair, looking lost in the elegant surroundings she'd once tried to exploit. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered. "The things I said about you, Mr. Kane. The way I treated my own daughter like a commodity. I was so broken inside I couldn't see straight anymore." "Mama," Tiana said softly, "what happened to you?" "Really happened?" For a moment, Loretta just stared at her hands. Then, slowly, painfully, she began to speak. She told them about her own childhood dreams of singing, crushed under her father's cruel words. About the men who'd used and abandoned her, leaving her with nothing but shame and anger. About how seeing Tiana's innocent joy had reminded her too much of what she'd lost. "But that's no excuse," she finished, wiping her eyes. "I became the very thing that hurt me, and I hurt my baby girl worse than anyone ever hurt me." Luis wheeled closer, his voice gentle but firm. "There's always hope for healing, Loretta, but this time, the truth must heal, not hurt. No more manipulation, no more lies. I want to change." Loretta whispered. I don't know how. Pastor Miriam has offered to help." Luis said, "I have a small cottage on the property. It needs some work, but it could be yours, with one condition. You agree to regular counseling with Pastor Miriam." Loretta looked up, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "You'd do that, after everything I did?" "Grace isn't about deserving," Luis replied. "It's about giving others the same mercy we've received ourselves." Tiana moved to kneel beside her mother's chair, taking her hand. "We can try again, Mama, but this time we do it God's way." Loretta broke down then, years of carefully maintained walls crumbling as she pulled her daughter close. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, baby girl." They spent the rest of the morning talking, really talking, for the first time in years. When Loretta left to meet with Pastor Miriam, there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. That evening, Tiana and Luis shared dinner by candlelight, the soft glow reflecting off crystal glasses and creating shadows that danced across the walls. "Do you think she can really change?" Tiana asked, pushing her food around her plate. Luis considered the question carefully. "I think when people truly face their brokenness, real healing becomes possible. Your mother's carried her pain like armor for so long. Maybe she's finally ready to lay it down." "It's strange," Tiana mused, "how God brought us all together. If you hadn't—" She trailed off, still uncomfortable with the memory of their beginning. "If I hadn't tried to protect you in the only way I knew how." Luis finished gently. "God uses our mistakes, our wrong turns, even our sins to guide us home. I've learned that the hard way." After dinner, they moved to the sunroom, now their favorite place for evening prayers. The night air was sweet with jasmine, drifting in through open windows as crickets sang their evening chorus. They prayed side by side, Luis in his wheelchair, Tiana in a comfortable chair beside him. Their words intertwined, a duet of gratitude and hope, asking for wisdom, for healing, for the strength to trust in love again. "Thank you, Lord," Tiana whispered, "for finding me when I was lost." "Thank you," Luis added softly, "for sending an angel disguised as a scared young girl to teach me how to live again." When they finished, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The peace between them felt different now, deeper, more settled, like roots growing strong and sure in fertile soil. "What happens now?" Tiana asked, not looking at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Luis reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Now we trust. Day by day, moment by moment, we let God write our story." The candles flickered, casting warm light across their joined hands, his strong and scarred, hers soft and paint-stained. Different paths, different pains, brought together by grace into something beautiful and new. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the night, its song clear and sweet. Inside, two hearts beat in quiet harmony, grateful for second chances and the mysterious ways of a God who specializes in making all things new. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and blooming chrysanthemums across the mansion's sprawling grounds. 6 months had transformed the once lonely estate into a bustling center of hope and healing. Banners announcing "The Grace Found Me Project" fluttered between white columns, while volunteers in matching blue shirts guided visitors towards the grand entrance. Inside the foyer, Tiana Coleman stood tall in a flowing yellow dress, her dark skin glowing with health and purpose. Gone was the frightened girl who'd once scrubbed dishes in a peeling yellow house. In her place stood a woman who radiated confidence and grace, greeting each guest with genuine warmth. "Welcome to our foundation," she said, embracing an elderly church member. "Please make yourself at home." The mansion's rooms, once filled with silent art pieces, now buzzed with life. The library had become a counseling center for abuse survivors. The greenhouse hosted art therapy sessions. Even the kitchen, where Tiana had first helped Luis with his dinner, now served as a training space for women learning culinary skills. Pastor Miriam moved through the crowd, her silver hair catching the light. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked Tiana, gesturing to the transformed space. Tiana shook her head, watching as another group of church members filed in. "Sometimes I still think I'm dreaming." Local news crews set up their equipment in the grand hall, where Luis Kane was scheduled to make his speech. Reporters whispered among themselves, noting how the reclusive billionaire had changed. The story of his recovery had captured public interest. The gay, wheelchair-bound philanthropist who learned to walk again through love and faith. As if summoned by their thoughts, Luis appeared at the top of the main staircase. He descended slowly, each step measured and deliberate, his cane tapping softly against the hardwood. The gathered crowd fell silent, watching with collective held breath as he made his way down. Tiana's heart swelled with pride. She remembered the countless hours of physical therapy, the falls and frustrations, the nights when pain kept him awake, but also the prayers they'd shared, the small victories they'd celebrated, the way his determination had never wavered. Luis reached the bottom step and smiled at the assembly. "Thank you all for coming today," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. The Grace Found Me project represents more than just a foundation. It's a testament to the power of second chances. Camera flashes sparked through the room as he continued. "When I lost my ability to walk, I thought I'd lost everything. I hid behind my wealth, using money to keep the world at arm's length. But God had other plans." His eyes found Tiana's across the room, and his smile deepened. "He sent me someone who showed me that true healing isn't about physical recovery. It's about learning to trust, to love, and to believe in miracles again." The Foundation's first successful cases stood near the front. Women who'd escaped abusive situations, veterans who'd found purpose through art therapy and job training. Their presence added weight to Luis's words, living proof that transformation was possible. Loretta Coleman stood among them, almost unrecognizable from the bitter woman she'd been. 6 months of counseling with Pastor Miriam had worked quiet miracles. She now helped run the Foundation's outreach program, using her own story to connect with women trapped in cycles of abuse. "Today marks not just the official opening of our foundation," Luis continued, "but a celebration of what happens when we let grace guide us home." He gestured toward the grand hall's far wall, where a large canvas stood covered. "And now, I'd like to share something special with you all." Tiana's breath caught. She hadn't seen the finished painting. Luis had kept it carefully hidden, working on it late into the night after she'd gone home. With help from an assistant, Luis pulled away the covering. Gasps filled the room. The painting, titled "Grace Found Me," captured Tiana in a moment of pure joy. She stood in the greenhouse, sunlight streaming through glass panels, surrounding her in a golden glow. But it wasn't just a portrait. It was a story told in light and shadow. In the background, subtle shapes suggested broken chains, rising doves, and reaching hands. Her face held both vulnerability and strength, tears and laughter, past pain and present joy. "This woman," Luis said, his voice thick with emotion, "taught me what real healing looks like. Not by words, but by example. She showed me that our scars don't define us, they refine us. Tears spilled down Tiana's cheeks as the crowd burst into applause. Church members who'd watched her growth from scared girl to confident leader wiped their own eyes. Pastor Miriam squeezed her hand, whispering, "Look what God has done." The rest of the afternoon flowed like a dream. Local media interviewed foundation beneficiaries, each story adding to the tapestry of hope being woven. Children from Tiana's art class performed a special song they'd written about new beginnings. The church choir filled the mansion with hymns of praise and thanksgiving. As sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, guests gathered in the garden for refreshments. Tiana found herself by the fountain, where tiny lights twinkled in nearby trees. She remembered feeding stray cats in her mother's backyard, humming her grandmother's hymns, dreaming of escape. "Penny for your thoughts?" Luis appeared beside her, his cane glinting in the fading light. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," she said softly. "How many lives will change because you dared to care about one scared girl?" Luis shook his head. "Because we dared to believe in something bigger than ourselves." He gestured to the mansion behind them, now alive with purpose. "This is your vision too, Tiana. You showed me that wealth means nothing without compassion." They watched as Loretta helped serve desserts, laughing with church members who'd become like family. Pastor Miriam sat with a group of veterans, her gentle presence drawing out stories of hope from tales of struggle. Children darted between tables, their joy infectious. "Grace found me," Tiana whispered, echoing the painting's title. "And now we get to help it find others." The evening air filled with music as the church choir began another song. Luit and Tiana stood together by the fountain, watching their dream take flight, surrounded by the beautiful proof that love, faith, and second chances could transform not just two lives, but an entire community. As twilight deepened into evening, the mansion filled with the warm buzz of celebration. Laughter echoed through halls that had once known only silence. The aroma of home-cooked dishes wafted from the kitchen, where Loretta moved with newfound grace, serving plates with genuine smiles that reached her eyes. "Try the peach cobbler," she urged guests, her voice carrying none of its old bitterness. Old family recipe, finally doing it justice. Pastor Miriam gathered everyone in the grand room, her weathered hands raised in blessing. "Lord," she prayed, her voice rich with emotion, "we thank you for bringing these two souls together. May their partnership continue to be a beacon of your grace, showing others the way home." The gathered crowd responded with heartfelt amens as Tiana and Luis exchanged glances full of quiet joy. As the evening wound down, guests began departing with warm hugs and promises to return. The mansion gradually emptied, leaving behind the lingering echoes of fellowship and celebration. Tiana and Luis found themselves on the wide front porch, surrounded by the gentle symphony of cricket songs and summer breeze. Fireflies danced in the garden below, their lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Luis reached for Tiana's hand, his touch gentle but sure. "We found grace," he said softly, "where the world saw nothing but broken pieces." Tiana leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Maybe that's what love really is," she whispered, seeing the beauty others miss. From the direction of the church, carried on the evening air, came the distant sounds of choir practice. The familiar hymns floated across the darkness like a blessing. They sat together in peaceful silence, their clasped hands speaking volumes words couldn't express. Two souls who had known deep wounds, now healed by faith, forgiveness, and each other's love, living proof that no heart was beyond redemption's reach. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.